Hello, everybody, again, and welcome to the 2020 Virtual Summer School Series, Extension Programming for Everyone Through the Lens of DEI. We're excited that you have joined us today for day 2. So I'm Diane Mashburn. I'm an Extension instructor with the University of Arkansas Division of Agriculture. Our Virtual Summer School Series is co-hosted annually by the Program and Staff Development Committee of the Southern Region Program Leaders Network and the National Association of Extension Program and Staff Development Professionals. Thank you to all those who contributed to planning this important and timely series. Today's session is Making Change from the Inside Out, and our presenter today is Whitney Gherman with the Ohio State Extension. She is an FCS educator in Marion County, Ohio. We also have 2 co-facilitators assisting us with our Q&A today. We have Fran Solinsky from the University of Maine Extension and Julie Robinson, University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture. So a little bit about Whitney. Whitney Gherman, whose pronouns are she, her, and hers, is an anti-racist educator who supports community members with knowledge and resources to engage in meaningful dialogue and produce positive outcomes for racial healing, healthy food access, and affordable housing. Grants have supported her work on bottom-up organizing and shared group leadership. In 2020, she was recognized by The Ohio State University for outstanding achievement of community university partnerships and received a National Diversity Award in her field. So with that, I will turn things over to Whitney to do her presentation. Thanks, Whitney.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you so much. You could be anywhere in the world right now, and you chose to be here. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for hosting me. I'm excited. I know some of you are just joining in on the phone. Some of you are watching the webinar. Everything is available to you after the recording. If you're tired, get up and stretch, move your bodies, do what you need to do. Hopefully this is an energizing session because I know that feeling of unfocused and stress, but it's only Tuesday. We can do it. I'm going to go ahead and pull up my PowerPoint now so we can get started. All right, as you can see, the title of my presentation is Making Change from the Inside Out. I titled it this because I really want to take you on a journey today of a journey that started with self-transformation and turned into community-wide transformation. Like I said before, like Diane introduced me, my name is Whitney. I'm with OSU Extension in Marion County, which is on the land of Miami and Hopewell. My degree is in social work, and I have some certificates in trauma-informed care and diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I bring that frame of social justice into my work in Extension, and I'm going to ground us and anchor us in those principles throughout the presentation today. But given the gravity of everything that's happening in the world and society, in our community and neighborhoods, I want to take some moments to ground us. During our time together, I want you to feel encouraged and mindful of planting your feet on the ground and reminding yourself that you are brilliant and rooted in greatness. And wherever you're sitting, just to relax your shoulders and come into the present moment. And as you breathe today, breathe from your bellies and take in joy and inspiration and curiosity. And exhale anything that doesn't belong to you: stress, fear, anxiety, frustration, or worry. Though we may not be in person today, I want to remind us in this virtual space that we are connected. The true self is good, wise, and powerful. The world is interconnected, and all humans desire relationships. All humans have gifts, and everything we need to make change is already here. I look forward to the next few moments where we can learn together and help each other. And feel free to make the space comfortable for you. Gather the things around you that make you feel calm and at peace, if that's water or candle or plant. Maybe it's a picture that's on your desk. I want this for this to be a moment for you. Today, our agenda is to reflect on our implicit bias as educators, to adopt ethical principles that respect the traditions and the assets of community members, and to also consider grassroots approaches and African and Indigenous ways of knowing so that we can meet urgent needs. My big request to you is that you try on what you hear today. It might be different than what you know extension to be, or different than what you think extension should be. That's okay. The goal here isn't to present something to you that you already know. My goal is to activate our radical imaginations and to build our stamina to have conversations, not as cooperative extension is, but as we might be, especially in the field of diversity, equity, and inclusion. The radical imagination is about having the courage and the intelligence to recognize that the world can and should change. The radical imagination is not just about dreaming of different futures, it's about bringing the possibilities from the future into the present and to inspire action and new forms of solidarity today. The radical imagination also represents our capacity to imagine and make common cause with the experiences of other people. It undergirds our ability to build solidarity across boundaries and borders, real or imagined. In this sense, it's the basis of solidarity in the struggle against oppression, which are the keys to building robust, resilient, and powerful communities. The picture on the slide in front of you shows where I spent office hours last summer. The smoke from the incense swirled around the porch, herbs and the lavender plant waned from the summer heat. The rocking chairs beneath us creaked as neighbors came and went, some stopping by just to exchange meals, and some stayed longer to share stories around Stark Court. Throughout the summer of 2019, we talked about dilapidated properties, the city's disregard for Ward 5. We discussed barriers to having the first African American getting seated on city council, the effects of climate change, the prison industrial complex, gender-based violence, and most notably, food apartheids and the devastating consequences of an unequal food system. In Marion County, Ohio, the per capita income is just under $40,000. The population is just under 40,000, which makes that a little confusing. But many neighborhoods that were once middle class are now run down. Black children are 4 times more likely to experience poverty compared to their white peers. This, combined with high levels of adult obesity and food insecurity, paints a picture of a struggling community. Given this, I knew that one initiative could not easily address decades of community neglect and disinvestment. And I understood that to some, I would be seen as an outsider, as a middle-class white woman who lived 30 miles south of town, working with a system that has a long history of discrimination. But back in my office, where previous ways of doing things was sufficient, my peers were sometimes skeptical, but I still persisted. Typically, how society makes change is through a top-down process. The dominant worldview is that complex issues can be solved by simplifying them. In Extension, we've managed complexity by breaking them down into programs. Adopting a lens of complexity offers a different way of looking at and working with issues found in the community. In the book, Getting to Maybe, there's metaphors of baking a cake, sending a rocket to the moon, and raising a child to illustrate the fundamental differences between simple, complicated, and complex issues. So some of you may have heard of this analogy before. The first is baking a cake. It's a simple problem with a simple solution. Expertise is helpful, but it's not required. I am not a Martha Stewart. I'm not a traditional FCS educator, but I can follow a recipe and I'm confident I'll be successful. I actually made a cake last night with my 6-year-old. Sending a rocket to the moon, that's more complicated. High levels of expertise across multiple fields is necessary. Finding the right protocol to follow takes years, and everyone involved must amass a great deal of training and expertise. But once you get the protocol down, and if you follow it exactly, your outcome is likely to be successful. Raising a child. I only have one, but raising a child right now during the coronavirus is complex. Anyone who has more than one probably knows that regardless of the number of experts, there's no single recipe or protocol that can be followed exactly and produce the same result. Raising a child, I wouldn't say it's a complex problem, but it really depends on a lot of relationship and variables that seem to change day to day. The majority of the complex issues faced in our community are more like raising a child than baking a cake. And whether we're trying to eradicate food insecurity or ensure a safe, affordable housing or improve other health outcomes, We know that there's not one single bullet that can create a solution. Most importantly, what is complex is fundamentally emergent, and it's built on relationship. So on Miss Atesta Hudson's porch, we turn those complex private problems of individuals into public issues and common goals. I generated plans with people that were directly affected by the complexity of problems that were showing up in our data. To Miss Hudson, Johnny Jackson, Miss Dyer, Miss Sims, Tim Jones, to many others, I was received as a welcome ally. They described that I was giving them a chance to ask questions and providing opportunities to express concerns and find resources to support their neighborhood. But really, consensus was built on how we were going to ethically share resources and knowledge and relationships. We agreed on tenets for democratic organizing that I'm going to share with you today. We read books from queer Black feminists, we took trips, we talked about our relationships and our strategies on radio shows and webinars and presentations like this one. Alone we could do so little, but together we felt like we could shape change and change society. Hold on, before I get into a framework, I really want to rewind and talk about what does it mean for me to be on this scene on the porch? You know, I live in a white body. I grew up upper middle class. I represent an institution of higher ed that has stolen native lands and historically barred African Americans from admission, has employed working class people for less than a livable wage. So how am I going to show up? Well, first, it was by letting go of an obsession with innocent and guilt and see those concepts as what they are. Often in community engagement or diversity work, we want to find a community member to deem us innocent so we don't have to look further into ourselves or feel more or understand ourselves. And on the so-called other side of things, we do everything we can to avoid guilt. We stretch truths, we obscure intentions, maybe we omit information in our success stories, and we build alliances to prevent ourselves from being culpable. Really, we've been trained this way by systems that penalize truth-telling. We weren't trained to admit what we don't know. Most of us were taught to sound certain and confident, to state our opinion as if it were true. We haven't been rewarded enough for just being confused, or for asking more questions rather than giving quick answers. We've also spent many years listening to others mainly to determine whether or not we agree with them. We don't have time or interest to sit and just listen to people that think or live differently than we do. But for many people in our community, innocence is a rarely awarded prize. There are some unintended consequences to face when we view a condition of a human being as a problem for an institution to solve. A solution that universities and the social sector will likely profit off of through research, government grants, or fees for service. And some of these consequences are that we teach people that they're deficient. We foster assumptions that students or residents are more likely to fail than to succeed, and fixate on changing a person's personal traits rather than changing an oppressive structure. For example, we may describe youth at risk instead of describing institutions being at risk of failing them. But worse than anything, we might silence or just ignore particular groups. What changes us from these modes of operating are processes of making amends, incorporating another reality into our own, of knowing ourselves and our motivations, being in practice with one another, interrupting our unconscious and violent flailings. What changes us the most is vulnerability, acknowledgement, and responsibility. So I want us to imagine, what would it look like if we could see ourselves as less innocent, but as harmed and harming, more or less honest, more or less able to be conscious when triggered, more or less manipulative, more or less willing to take responsibility for change, more or less caught in these patterns? Would we be able to better create healthy, vibrant communities? In this excerpt from E-Extension Foundation, Johnny Jackson, one of the community members I worked with, we hosted a learning community on heal, repair, and recover. And in this clip I'm about to show you, we exchanged some thoughts about this division in communities and how we act in solidarity through radical honesty. And if anyone has questions and wants to talk like off recording about what this looks like, you know, it means no omissions with each other, no white lies, no projections, asking each other what we really wanted answers to, speaking truth to each other and acknowledging the dynamics between us, and just being in complexity.
So, like, I come out of like the Black church in my community is a hub of Black culture when it comes to educating us, affirming our identities, and those type of things. But that also is an institution that advocates for certain things for around teachers, around programming to help uplift around business things. So those are really the hubs. And those are also the historical hubs where civil rights kind of gets acted out in different communities of color, particularly the Black community. So I always think of we. So if I'm engaging in a relationship with a white institution, I have elders that I go to and ask, what is their history with this institution? What's their current relationship with the institution? And how have they kind of navigated certain institutions? Because that's very helpful for me as I embark on relationships with people and also with institutions. It'll give me an understanding of maybe the resistance to racial inclusion, the resistance to racial justice type of work, that type of thing. And, you know, I've noticed even in our work together that we were given a presentation one time and Whitney was talking about whiteness and what white supremacy has done to be divisive in our communities, the white community, the Black community. And afterwards, there was a white male that kind of, I would say, like, very much drilled down the questions about why they should do this work and any of those things around a history of exclusion. And I remember afterwards just like feeling how you felt, like, and you trying to do that work and understanding that the attack isn't necessarily just at you, it was also at the programming that you were trying to do for advocating for a community of color. So, I mean, afterwards, I remember us having a deep talk and that being more of a reparative talk, like how do we pick up and how do we strategize to make sure that you don't get so attacked and I don't get so attacked when we're seeking this type of work. And I learned a lot of these strategies from being a student of history, especially a student of civil rights movements, also the Black liberation movement, and how struggles for civil rights actually work in different communities. Yeah?
So Johnny and I really had to decide, how are we going to show up together? How are we going to have these critical conversations at a small level between a personal relationship and then reverberate out? Because if we can't do this at a very small scale with one another, how are we going to make community change? And so we kind of developed this concept of the 4 C's. To preface this process, what I'm about to present is not something that is not already in you. You have greatness and brilliance. That's why you're in this work. So I want to think about this process like the phases of the moon. The moon is already there, whether the light is shining on it or not. Our work in communities is about fully illuminating ourselves and the contributions of others in a non-linear and iterative way. So just like the moon goes through these phases, we're going through phases of connection, clarity, consent, and compensation. And in this framework, nothing is wasted. Nothing is a failure because change is constant. So we're going to open up the chat, and I really hope we can be in dialogue together. And I want you to think for this first question: how do you connect with community members? Listening, showing up to things that are important to them, being where they are, volunteering. Yeah, someone mentioned it's really a lot easier in person. asking for stories and perceptions of their communities, the history of the communities that they work with, living in and near the community itself, sharing food and working together on a daily basis, lots of listening and attending events and personal relationships. These are really great strategies. Smiling and being open. Absolutely, these are wonderful. Increasing their own cultural competencies, doing my own research, showing up consistently, yeah, not just one time. Feel free to continue to add if you like as we keep going. I think this will generate a lot of great resources and ideas that we could summarize and share with the group. So briefly, I'm just showing here ways that I've connected that some of you have already named and known. First, it's making reasonable efforts to reach audiences that historically we haven't reached before or maybe even neglected. One reasonable effort might be going on a radio show or going door to door, getting referrals from elders, which I think I saw in the community or in the chat too, is having that connection with the larger community, living in the community. Premising on relationships and trust, I really like some of the examples I'm seeing of just listening and being inclusive and working on your own self, because that all creates positive relationships and trust. And it helps facilitate environments where there's not just diverse people, right? But there's diverse ways of doing things, practices, conditions, and values. It's also acknowledging that people in our community do not live a single issue life. On the screen here, you can see a big chalkboard that I put together, and I'd circulated it in many different community spaces to ask what people's needs were. And none of us, we could fill that chalkboard up, right? Like, especially right now with the needs that we have. All of these community complex issues interlapped and are intersectional, and they're not untangled from one another. But I think it's important that when we connect, that we're creating that space and tension for residents to articulate and to act on what they really care about, and building our programs around that. I think that strengthens our credibility and helps us build not just participants, but active participants in creating conditions that benefit their own health and well-being. So now we're going to move from this idea of how have you connected, how have you clarified? How do you clarify information with community members? This might be information that's just science-based. It could be clarity around roles and responsibilities. It could be clarity about decision-making, that your institution, how we make decisions, how we're funded. Asking questions, asking where they get their information from, just being honest and saying, I don't know if you don't know, which is amazing transparency. Through a mission statement and written policies, absolutely. Being really clear on what our purpose is. Being open, being in dialogue with multiple representatives of the community. Yeah, absolutely. What one community says might be completely different than what another community says, even though they're all living in the same geographic place. Giving resources like fact sheets. Okay, these are really good, restating things to make sure, yeah, this is, you got it, you guys, yeah, you got this. This is wonderful. So adding on to what's already been shared, what I kind of came up with was, how do we form common language? How do we articulate shared values? Coming up with that helps us when we're trying to achieve big results. Also finding out what people want and how they want it and how often and who's going to deliver it. Being transparent about our purpose. I had a gentleman ask me, because part of my position is funded by SNAP Ed, well, what does Ohio State want to do with changing what I eat? And I think that created a really good dialogue and helped me clarify why we're in this space, and learning from him what he wanted from this space and how he defined healthy eating. I've said before about just being transparent about how decisions are made and about our funding. And someone already named this as being honest about limitations, both personally and institutionally. We can't do it all. We can't be an expert of everything. That's one great thing about the network of cooperative extension is where I lack in one area, I can call on a friend to fulfill a need or to answer a request. And then there's just some things that just don't fit in with what we do. So being honest about that and saying what we can and can't do. And yes, I love the question, and I know we really want to take these questions in the Q&A box, but how we identify this common language, and I'll make sure to answer that question. I think what I'm going to show you next will help. We offered a program called Community Voices, which really gets at how do we mobilize grassroots level leaders and develop shared group leadership. And this is a program that came from North Carolina A&T University Extension, Dr. Michelle Ely. And then in this next clip, I'm going to show you in our first meeting, we identified some principles for organizing and leading together.
Working together in solidarity is working as a team and is working for the same goal, which is help our community. Trabajar juntos en solidaridad es trabajar para un mismo goal, una misma meta, que es ayudar a nuestra comunidad.
Well, first of all, you want to make yourself better. So committing to that is having mentors, going into the community and seeing what resources you have there that can help you make that transformation quicker and make it stronger for yourself that is everlasting.
It means being able to have all the kids, even the ones with disabilities, be a part of the big picture. So events in the community, what does that look like for children with disabilities? Well, a lot of children can't handle loud noise, they can't handle the really hot heat. And so you with them by making sure there's a sensory tech available, making sure that these children feel like they have that space to
Think about organizing. I'm very inspired by Black liberation movements, the Black Power movement, Civil Rights movement, and Black Lives Matter. So bottom-up organizing is thinking with policy, with people around. Like, for example, I'm running for school board, but it was out of 3 community members' demands to do it. So I think that that's kind of like bottom-up organizing.
So as you can see there, those are just some of the initial values that we decided to hold in the space of community voices. But it does take a lot of time to build that common language. I've seen, especially in this time, a lot of book clubs so that people are coming from a similar framework from one another. We've also used, besides these principles from grassroots organizing, collective impact is another framework that we've used to develop common language. And common data. And then in addition, emergent strategy is another book I would recommend. You know, it can start there. If there's more questions, please add them in the Q&A because I love the dialogue and we're almost there. But in the chat now, let's move into how do you request or receive consent from community members? So I want you to answer that however you interpret it. How do you request or receive consent from community members? Asking for help, a leader's council, being present, asking when it's appropriate, don't assume how I can help, asking permission. I love that people are just like, ask. Yeah. It should be so basic, right? What do you think? Does this sound workable? Making sure people have options. Listening, great. How can my resources help you? Yeah, I like that because that's put so politely. Sometimes I'm always thinking, like, how do we extract resources from the university? But I think, yeah, reframing it how you have of how can my resources help? What can I give from the university to support this cause that you really care about? Also, you know, asking yourself, why do you want to do this work? Why do you want to work with this particular community? Why do you want to work on this particular issue? Why do they want to do this work? Why do they want to work with Extension? Are there matches here? I've also noticed, especially recently, it's a lot of waiting, and I'm kind of an impatient person. A lot of people in my office will probably nod their heads if they're listening that I want to go, go, go. But it's a lot of waiting, and waiting to who asked you to do this work. Really making it known to yourself and to the community that if you're offering a program, you know directly the need. And it's not always a need that's identified in a formal assessment, but like I said before, it's knowing that community, those elders or those young people that have asked you for what they want to get done. I think one of the biggest mistakes that social change leaders make is differentiating between mobilizing and organizing. Mobilizing is about recruiting people to support a vision, a cause, or a program, and it's one that you've already established. You already have it on your strategic plan. And in this model, an educator, leader, an organization is the subject that makes the decision, and community members are just the passive objective of those decisions. You know, we're offering this program, we hope people come out to the programming. Organizing, on the other hand, is about cultivating leaders in the community, identifying their interests, and distributing resources to support their leadership and their ownership of the program or the cause. So, you know, I shared the work that Johnny and I had done together. We co-facilitate extension programming together. And we're going to talk about that when we get to compensation too. But I think it's important to take away that we decentralize power and to support leadership in the community that is most affected by whatever complex problem we're trying to solve. And then just to note that consent is not just a one-time thing, right? Like, we always need to be checking in and always asking questions and always asking, is this okay? Is this reflective of what you wanted me to do? So just keep that in mind too. And then our last 4C is about compensation. So in the chat, just write your ideas of how do you compensate community members? Feeding them snacks, delivering on what they ask you to do, giving them credit for their ideas, listening and being flexible, working with them, achieving their goals, thanking them, stipends, food, supplies, gift cards. Yeah, these are really great. I think that recognition piece is something that I overlooked in this presentation that could add some value to it, is making sure who's getting recognition for the work. These are really great suggestions. So yeah, I mean, I think we know what compensation means. It means that we're paying people, right? Like, I'm getting paid to sit here to do this project, and I'm going to pay you equally. So writing people into grants, writing community navigators into grants, paying people not just for being a participant, but it's about paying people for their knowledge, paying people for the resources that they're sharing with you, and paying people for the relationships that they've created for you to be in the space that you're in. Another piece about compensation is about mutual aid. So this is really an unspoken solidarity that we have. And in this view, we recognize that private property is just, you know, the work of state institutions. So it's not really, it's less about monetary value and more about how do we meet each other's need and understand that we all live under a system that's not going to meet our needs. And so how can we do it together? So, you know, I might grow some amazing kale and peppers and tomatoes, and you might be offering a gift of music or art, and we can exchange our talents to support one another. These are all ways that we can think about compensation in a more indigenous sense, and a more way of knowing that nothing really belongs to us, but we belong to one another. And then I just put up here, there are so many projects that I have like worked on under this framework, and I wish I could like break down and tell you all about them, but I wanted to just give you the high overview. And maybe there's one up there that you're like, I'm working on housing right now. Tell me about, how did you engage community members in your housing events? Or if you're working on urban farming. So I guess I'll kind of touch on some of them briefly because we have a few more minutes. But you know, one example was the Growing Through Justice series that just happened. We just wrapped that up in June, and it was, you know, different because I'm used to organizing people in person, and now we're in COVID. And I pointed out before, I don't live in the community, so how am I going to stay connected? And so I don't know if some of you have seen on other social media sites how we're passing the mic, right? Like recognizing that we don't have all the answers, and also recognizing historically we have centered one way of doing agriculture. So how do we distribute that equally and honor Black, Indigenous, people of color, and their traditions with agriculture? And so Growing Through Justice was listening to Black farmers across the state of Ohio and the work that they're doing around healthy food access, land transfer, plant medicine, and lots of other great topics. So that's one example. The street name change was a really awesome project. It was a group of community members that wanted to change the street name to Martin Luther King Jr. Avenue. And our role was really simple. You know, we wrote a grant to cover the cost. But the idea, everything behind the project came from the community, and we secured $500, and that $500 went to residents in the neighborhood because there is a fine, like not fine, there's a fee on when you change your license. If you have to change your address, there's like a $20 fee. So we cover the cost of that fee so that something that was really positive and beautiful wouldn't be a barrier to someone else. Disability inclusion. This has been an ongoing project since 2017, and it's been about we know that 17% of the community in Marion experiences some kind of disability. And we also know many of them are food insecure. And so instead of just delivering meals and food to them, how could they be active participants in creating opportunities for their own health and well-being? And so actually what we did is we found funding again to pay community members that have some sort of disability to pack and distribute produce that they benefited from their community benefited from. And through this mobile delivery service, you know, they've gone throughout the neighborhood and received a lot of amazing recognition from the USDA, the CDC, and to someone's point earlier about giving them recognition and credit, it feels really good. We've done photo voice projects around healthy food access. We've had workshops on racial understanding and kind of like all over the place, but really I think it can all fit under our vision, which is helping Ohioans have the knowledge and resources they need to actively engage in creating conditions in which they thrive. So this feels like maybe a lot, and I think the best place to start is to start small and to be wrong, to be less on point and more on purpose, to start with like your coworkers and look at the past and what has been the trend within your office or within your state or within cooperative extension, and what is the present and how can we imagine the future, and how do all these forces work together? There's so many resources right now for implicit bias, and I wanted to add an activity and I was like, nope, I'm taking on too much. But the Gherman Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity at The Ohio State University has great online modules that you can take to do some initial implicit bias. And there's so many anti-racism trainings right now that you can take to better understand like your own racial identity, the identity of others. Obviously, this fits into other demographic groups as well, you know, gender, sexual orientation, ability status, age. The work I focus on just happens to be with race. And community organizing principles. So my background, I said in the beginning, is social work, and I come from this framework of how do we understand systems, policies, and communities and anchor in community organizing. And so you might find resources online, or you can reach out to learn more about that. I think someone put this in the chat box too. It's just like taking someone to lunch and getting to know the community and supporting events that they've already organized. I think of our Latinx community, and every year they have a great event, and just going and showing up for them. And not always, this one's really hard for me, not always being the expert and just going to support and not fact share and resource share. And my friends are probably so sick of me that every time I text them and say, oh, I have a great book for you to read. And then just asking for help. You know, we're in this together, asking help from others in the field, and apply who you are to this work. Anything that you have to offer, whether it's teaching parenting classes, leading youth in a 4-H club, or working at a farm in agriculture, apply who you are to bend towards justice. Our community members will appreciate it, and I appreciate it. I put on my last slide, I'm going to read it out loud, and then we'll go back to this dialogue, that what Ella Baker says is that I was never working for an organization. I've always tried to work for a cause, and that cause to me is bigger than any organization, bigger than any group of people, and it's the cause of humanity. That cause is the cause that brings us together and drives the human spirit for freedom. So I wanted to take some moments to answer some of these questions. I'm going to turn off my slideshow so you can actually see my face a little more clear. You will get a copy, I promise, of the PowerPoint and the recording and anything you need.
Thanks so much, Whitney. We have a couple of questions in the question and answer already. How do you navigate what projects you get involved with, and what projects to refer to other community organizations that may be doing similar work?
I think that's a really good question, especially for someone like me who feels like I can just take on the whole world, and that's not realistic at all. I think, oh shoot, that question went away. Let me go back to it. So I want to make sure I heard every part of it. Navigating what projects to work on is knowing, is this in my skill set? So lately, you know, I've really thought about, what do I want to focus on? My focus has been basically on food insecurity, housing, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I've just tried to be more intentional about, this is how I'm showing up, and this is how I have to contribute. And if it's not a fit, it's not a fit. I would love to do more work around substance abuse prevention, and I would love to offer more nutrition classes. But right now, my focus really is on this equity piece. And I think just having those personal boundaries help us know when we need to pass the baton, and know that actually we'll probably get to the finish line quicker if we occasionally pass the baton.
We have a question about guidance on kicking these inclusive approaches up so they are more top-down directives, have gotten pushback at different times from leadership when advocating for inclusion, etc. Do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, I do have thoughts. Yeah, I mean, this is not a top-down approach at all. And yeah, have received a lot of pushback at different times. The way you're describing too, Taryn, is, you know, when you're advocating for leadership, this is kind of a paradigm shift. This is not the way that we've been trained or taught. But, you know, I have confidence that we make change through top-down approaches, through bottom-up approaches, and sometimes we just need to turn and go more horizontally and recognize that we all have something to contribute. So I'm really just trying to balance the power. And for a long time, we've taken the top-down approach. So I'm trying to offer something new and different in my county.
What is photo voice?
Okay, so Photo Voice is really cool. And I'm sure if you just like start Googling, you'll find amazing projects. The one we did in Marion was with Dr. Dan Remley, and it is equipping youth. We use young people, you can do it with adults, with cameras or smartphones and other devices to take pictures of their lived experience around a certain issue. So in this situation, we asked youth to take pictures of how they access or encounter barriers in their built environment with healthy food access. So students took pictures not just of like where they got food, which was like the convenience stores, sometimes like Dollar Trees, but also they took pictures of like sidewalks and showed us where there were like sidewalks that were broken that would make it difficult for them when they were riding their bikes. Or they showed us a lot more than what we asked for. Now I'm thinking through it, but it really helped generate their ideas. And then together we came across some big themes and helped really advocate what their experience was like and help them come up with recommendations to make change around food access. So in this situation, our regional planning commission did take a look at where there were some sidewalks that needed fixed and where there were sidewalks that needed to be added, because a lot of young people would go from the high school to the convenience store. And it's not every day that stakeholders are seeing those experiences. So Photo Voice allows them to amplify those experiences and also tell a story that's relevant to them.
Whitney, what steps do you take into consideration when you know every community ethnic group has a different and unique leadership style?
Yeah, I think that's good. I actually take a lot of classes. So I'm enrolled in classes continually to like better understand, because I don't understand everything. Predominantly the community that I work with in Marion is Black. And so I've taken a lot of like African and African American history classes and different trainings to increase my cultural competency and also to just increase my understanding of what it means to be white. And then I think the relationship building that I talked about before, we did Dining with Diabetes with the Latinx community, and it was a bilingual program. And the first time through, like the way we communicated things was not clear at all. And it wasn't the way that they received information. So now doing it again, we're thinking differently about, okay, maybe this wasn't the approach. So how do we be more in relationship with one another and allow them to market and message the program rather than our office? So you can't be an expert all the time, but constantly learn and examine. I think that's the key.
How do we navigate the emotional aspect that by reaching out now, we may feel awkward or guilty for not having reached out earlier?
I would say that, like, I would just say exactly what you said is, I feel awkward. I feel ashamed that I didn't reach out to you before. And I acknowledge the neglect, and I acknowledge my role in upholding, norms of white supremacy. No, I don't know, Rebecca, if you're white or not, but these are just some examples of what you can do. I think people appreciate being genuine. And I think that genuineness allows there to be mistakes and helps kind of overcome those feelings of guilt or shame. And again, returning to the point of finding people that you can do this with, finding people that are in maybe the same job position that you're in, or finding people that belong to the same racial or ethnic group that maybe have a little bit more experience than you that can mentor you and guide you.
Thanks so much. We're all caught up on questions.
Okay, good.
Hey, well, great. Thank you so much again, Whitney. You definitely got us all thinking, and hopefully we've taken away lots of great, not just a few little nuggets, but a lot of great things to keep us going and keep us thinking. So We want to thank everybody for attending today's session of Virtual Summer School. We'll be sharing her presentation, as she mentioned, on the NAE PS2P webinar archive page, along with today's recording. Please give us a little bit of grace on that, because it'll take a couple days. We are getting each of these recordings transcribed for accessibility. So it'll be a few days lag for each of the sessions, but they will be up there soon. We also would appreciate your feedback on today's session. You'll be able to provide that in a survey, which can be accessed either by clicking the link that we'll be sharing momentarily in the chat. And then also, as you'll see with the closing slides, there will be a QR code that you can snap a picture with your camera, and it'll take you to our survey. And to close, also, we would like to invite you to join us for Wednesday's session. We have Jennifer Taylor from Western Oregon University, and her session is on a proactive approach to inclusion of individuals with disabilities, which will give us a lot more, even more to think about with our programs. You can visit the NAE PS2P website to register for any of the remaining sessions in the series. That link has also been chatted out. And we want to thank you again, Whitney, for presenting today. And I want to thank our facilitators, Fran and Julie, and Mary Pulling on our technical side of things. And to everybody in attendance, we hope you have a wonderful day, and we will see you all tomorrow.